For those of you who've been laid off recently, this video will probably resonate with you. But I wanted to talk about something that I've been noticing over the course of time and speaking to more and more people, and something that I've actually experienced myself. But there is a hidden and devastating cost to layoffs that people aren't really talking about. Hey everybody, it's Brian from Life After Layoff, and if you don't know who I am, I'm a corporate recruiter and an HR professional with over 20 years of experience interviewing and hiring thousands of people into some of the world's largest and most well-known companies. In fact, I have my own particularly devastating layoff story that happened in 2020, and if you're interested in the long version of it, I'll leave a link somewhere up here that you can check out. So long story short is, as I was working as a recruiter for a manufacturing company in a remote capacity, and I was living in one location, and it was relatively close to the corporate headquarters. It was within about an hour, and so I would occasionally go into the office. But we made a decision during the pandemic. Everything kind of shut down, and people were going fully remote, and my family and I made a decision to get closer to other family, so we decided to leave that location and relocate to a different state, a few states away. So we load up the U-Haul. My work knew all about it. I loaded up the U-Haul, relocated, moved in on a Friday, and we ended up selling a house, but I moved in on a Friday. And on the following Monday, and keep in mind, the U-Haul is still sitting in the front driveway, I get an email stating that I have this mystery meeting with the CHRO of the company. And of course, long story short, is I get laid off, and it's very unexpected. So that set me on a complete tailspin. I had promised my wife that we would move into a bigger, better, nicer situation. I would buy her a house and all of this stuff. And obviously that didn't come to fruition at the time that we had planned it. Not to mention I had very small kids, and it was not an easy conversation to go to my wife. So obviously the impact of the layoff itself was very devastating. Trying to deal with all the emotional impacts of it, processing it, trying to understand what it would mean for us, kind of like low-key freaking out, because my wife had ended up quitting her job too when we made the move, because we were going to be able to try to scrape by on one salary. So basically it was in a rock and a hard place. And again, I started the channel. There's a whole story about it. You can check out the genesis of a life after layoff. So obviously, I talk to a lot of people who have been laid off as well, and there are a lot of implications that go beyond just the initial, you've been laid off, you need to scramble to find a job, and it can be difficult, especially in a market where everybody's getting laid off and there's no jobs. And one of the things that I've noticed after talking to hundreds, if not thousands of people about their careers and getting back to work after a particularly ill-timed layoff is that there is a devastating and hidden cost to them that a lot of people aren't taking into account. In fact, it's not even really being talked about. So I want to break down what those are and how you can position yourself to try to minimize the impact of them. And don't think that it won't happen to you. And probably most people who are watching this video right now have been the victim of an ill-timed or unplanned layoff or work interruption at some point over the last 4 years. And if you haven't, you're an anomaly and you're one of the unusual ones. And so you should feel pretty good about that. And one of the biggest impacts that I didn't realize at the time was going to be with the 401k. I just thought, yeah, I'll roll over the 401k. They send you a bunch of information. They kind of want you out of their 401k program. They kind of give you some information with your severance package on how you can do all that stuff. But then the question is like, okay, where do I put it? If you don't have another 401k or a Roth IRA or whatever started somewhere, you can't really roll it into anything else. So I sat there kind of just looking at this 401k with its balance and all the company match and all that kind of stuff that I had accumulated over time. Well, it wasn't until a couple of years later when I decided to roll over my 401k into another program that I realized the devastating impact, because I went to go and move the money over and I saw the certain balance and that's what I was planning on. But when I went to actually process the payment to be able to transfer the money over, only about 2/3 of it was actually showing. And it was a significant number that was not coming over with the 401k rollover. And I was like, what the heck is going on? Well, I come to find out that they didn't honor the vesting. So I had all of this money it's almost like a cruel joke. It was showing that you had this money in this account, but when you actually went to transfer it, you didn't have claim to their money. And the particularly devastating part about it is I was only a few short months away from hitting my anniversary date, which would have nearly fully vested me in the 401k. But here I am getting laid off through no fault of my own. And they didn't honor the vesting for the 401k. So if I was to go back and try to do it over again, I might have asked the question of, can I be fully vested on my portion of the company match? They may have told me to pound sand, but it's definitely something that I would suggest that you try to do if you are in the laid off situation and you're relatively close to your vesting period, just to see if they throw you a bone there. But it was a painful lesson to learn that set me back quite a bit. The same thing goes for equity. I know a lot of people who've had equity stakes in companies where they're only a few short months away from vesting in it, and they basically have no claim to the stock options because they didn't hit that certain milestone. And that's a particularly devastating part about the 401k matches, equity stakes in companies, is not only do you potentially lose what you haven't vested yet, but when you join a new company, now you start all the way at the beginning again and the timer resets. So if you're somebody that was working in a place for a particularly long period of time, that can be really devastating because now you have to rebuild up equity and tenure in a role in order to fully claim that 401k. And if you're at the end of your career and this happens, it can set your retirement plans completely off. And that's something that people aren't necessarily talking about. The next particularly devastating aspect about being laid off that I didn't take into account was medical insurance. Medical insurance is a massive expense, and you don't really realize it until you're handed the bill in the form of a COBRA coverage or a COBRA payment. So if you don't know how COBRA works, the company is required to offer you a continuation of benefits for a certain period of time. But the asterisk here and where they get you is it's at their cost. Now, their cost is likely cheaper than what you can get on the open market yourself. But nonetheless, when you suddenly are faced with unemployment and you don't have a paycheck coming in anymore, now you're faced with having to pick up COBRA coverage. Now, a company may offer you a few months of benefits continuation as part of their severance program. And if they don't, this is another thing that I would try to negotiate in a severance, is to try to see if they can cover some more of my medical insurance. But that is a massive impact that people don't understand. And if you want an even more sobering experience related to healthcare, those of us in the United States know this very well, but then you have to go to the marketplace and you have to sign up for a benefits package that's completely at your cost. No employer benefits program. You don't have the benefit of the employer being able to negotiate for a large group of people. You're basically a single person trying to get this insurance, and expect that your insurance coverage will be much worse and much more expensive. And this is particularly devastating because you don't have a paycheck coming in, and now you're having to dip into your savings, potentially the 401k that you now no longer vest on, and you're just trying to make ends meet and get coverage for your family. But it gets even worse because then you sign up for this unemployment insurance and you have to go through the claims process, you have to apply for it, you have to get approved, you have to do some activities related to job search, and then you basically have to prove that you're looking for a job. And at the end of the day, it's often just pennies on the dollar. And in fact, where I moved to, the amount came out to something like $150 or $200 a week. It didn't even cover an entire month's rent. So you're looking at all these other expenses, food, car payments, insurance, and all this stuff, the medical coverage. And you're basically working with peanuts. And it's pretty devastating when you think you've paid all these years into a system that pays you pennies on the dollar back. Not to mention, it's only for a certain period of time and the clock starts ticking immediately. So you have to get on looking for a new job very quickly. So it's all kind of a snowballing effect with finances related to getting laid off. And this is a huge impact that people aren't really talking about when they get laid off. And in fact, keeping on those same lines, another major impact that people aren't talking about, and it's particularly devastating for people who are later in their career, is that your vacation gets reset to zero. So you go back down to the base level, which in the United States is only 2 weeks. I just made another video about why working in the United States is pretty much broken, but you only get 2 weeks of vacation. And if you're lucky, you might be able to negotiate a third week. But if you're somebody that was sitting on 4 and 5 weeks of vacation and had all these other accrued benefits, and then you get laid off, it's going to take you 10, 20 years plus in order to get back to that same level of benefit. And you have to start over again. You have to pay your dues. You have to kind of, save up and accrue your time. And you have a fraction of what you used to. And it's all fine and dandy, but with the culture today in the workplace where people are getting laid off every 1-2 years, good luck ever vesting for the 3rd and 4th weeks of vacation. And probably one of the most devastating impacts of them all is a loss of career momentum. And this is something that you won't realize when you get laid off. And oftentimes you won't realize it until a year or 2 down the road. And this is especially true for those of you who have been at an employer for a long period of time. a single employer, maybe you got into a nice high paying job that was relatively high up on the totem pole, got kind of comfortable. The layoff comes. They make your role redundant, and you think that you're just going to pick back up where you left off with some other employer because you've got this long work history. But then you get to the open market and you realize the skills, the knowledge, the experience that you've developed over time are not valued on the open market the same way that they used to be valued at your previous company. In fact, had that skill set or job type been valued by the previous company, they probably wouldn't have laid you off to begin with. And so oftentimes what happens is people will struggle and struggle mightily when they're in their 40s, 50s, and 60s when they get laid off, where they can't seem to get back to where they left off. Suddenly they're invisible to employers. Their skill sets no longer seem to matter, and people tend to get very frustrated, and rightfully so. Listen, it's an ego hit to have the job market basically tell you that you're unhireable even though you have a long and stable and solid work history behind you. And all the momentum that you built up over your career gets pulled out from underneath you in one quick rug pull. You have to rebuild relationships. You have to rebuild internal equity. You know, when you start a company and you work there for a long period of time, you get to know people. People get to know you. You get to build relationships with people, and that's worth something. And that takes a long time to develop. And when you get laid off and you join a new company, you're the new guy. Nobody knows who you are. Nobody knows what you can produce. And you might get a little benefit of the doubt for the first few months that you're on the job, but your reputation gets established very early in. And without careful career strategy, it's easy to lose all momentum even when you join a new employer. And unfortunately, what was once a very promising career can be completely derailed by one poorly timed layoff. And of course, you have to talk about the impact on compensation. Oftentimes, people will hit certain compensation ranges that are probably not realistic outside of the context of that company and that particular job opportunity, especially if that job opportunity or that job type is not in high demand. So when you enter into the open market, you're suddenly faced with the reality that you might have to take a serious pay cut if somebody will even offer you the job. So again, we're talking about all this career momentum. Compensation is often very difficult to replace. Now, in some cases, people have done very well for themselves and upgraded in those situations. And in fact, I've done that myself. But in a lot of cases, people really struggle to get back to where they used to earn. And it's not just the amount of money that you make in your salary, it's your bonuses. It's the percentage of your bonus calculation. So if you're getting a 10% bonus and you're suddenly making 30, 40, 50% less than your last job, your bonus is also going to be much smaller. Not to mention your 401k contributions and your matches will also be much smaller. Everything else kind of cascades from there, and it can have a snowballing and rippling effect throughout the rest of your career. And one bad job tends to lead to another bad job and another bad job if you're not super careful about what you're doing. So those are some of the hidden costs from the employee side that are very devastating and not really talked about much. But there's actually some from the employer's side too when a layoff happens, namely the department morale. When you have a layoff that hits a lot of personnel, and especially with people who are not performance-based layoffs, and it's just entire departments are cut or half of the department or certain job functions or titles are cut, the team has to show back up the next day and act like nothing ever happened. All the while, there was a massacre that just took place, and the person they went to go get coffee with every day and that person that they used to pass by their desk to go to the lunchroom is suddenly no longer there. And when you go to your team meetings and you're looking around, there's only 3 of us left when there used to be 8 of us just yesterday. And they have to basically pretend like nothing happened. But the reality is that the people who survive the layoffs are never the same. They have to pick up the pieces. They have to do the extra work. They have to figure out how the work was even performed. And they're expected to do it with a smile on their face because there's a proverbial gun held to their head saying, if you don't like it, you're going to be next. And so morale typically plummets, and you often have people leaving and considering other job opportunities that may not have considered it just the day before. So there is a very real impact in that regard as well. There's nobody left untouched in a layoff. And then from a recruiting perspective, and this is assuming that there's any recruiters left after a layoff because they're usually the first to be let go, But trying to recruit new people into a company when there is a very highly publicized layoff can be much more difficult because now you have to answer those questions. And if you're somebody that's in control of your career and is highly selective and can afford to be highly selective, which is hopefully what we want to do, then they should be asking those difficult questions and they should be challenging the company to ensure that the position is going to be stable and solid and that they're making a smart decision. And I guarantee you that companies that have mass layoffs, and especially multiple rounds of mass layoffs, and they don't have a lot of people with tenure and role, and the management team seems to turn over very quickly, those are all the signs of a red flag employer, and a good, solid employee is not going to take a job opportunity that is likely to be very chaotic. And of course, I would be remiss if I didn't talk about the impact on the bottom line of the business. If you're somebody that worked at a company where you were also the customer and you laid them off, how is that going to impact your bottom line? And I'm thinking, like, for example, I worked at Amazon. I didn't get laid off at Amazon, but I know a lot of people who got laid off at Amazon. And potentially tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of people over the last several years have been laid off. And if each one of those people decides to boycott Amazon because they no longer want to be associated with the company because they've been unceremoniously dumped by them, and each one of those people spends $100 a year, think about the math. What's the lost cost of business and the bottom line to the organization through this layoff? And so there are a lot of hidden costs in layoffs that people aren't necessarily talking about, and they can be particularly devastating. So if you're somebody that has experienced an untimely layoff, or you think it can't happen to you, you have to be eyes wide open and putting in contingency plans. I'm always thinking strategically about my next steps. Do a SWOT analysis on your organization, on your job type, on you individually, and how safe you are. What's the threats, the opportunities, the weaknesses, the strengths of your organization and of your job and of your career, and take the necessary precautions to try to make yourself a more marketable candidate. And of course, I will preach this till I'm blue in the face, and I don't care how many people take exception to it. Build up multiple streams of income, because if you have multiple streams of income, it solves a lot of the problems that I just described in this video. Because when you build multiple ways to pay your bills, it solves a lot of the issues that I described earlier in this video. You no longer have to worry about taking the next job that comes your way, even if it's not a good fit for your career and this career momentum. You can afford to pay for your bills. You don't have to dip into your 401k and cannibalize it. There's a lot of advantages to having the ability to cover your bills in more than one way. And it's a high sense of freedom and power when you can sit back and be selective about the role that you take next. But if you're somebody that's struggling to get back into the workforce after an untimely layoff, that's actually something that I specialize in. I've got a website called lifeafterlayoff.com, which is loaded with insider tips, tricks, real life stories of people who have walked the walk too. And I share my deepest and most intimate knowledge in the form of some training courses. And one of the core things that people lack is strategy. Strategy is the missing ingredient in 99% of people who have career-related issues. And I created a course called The Ultimate Career Blueprint, which teaches you how to create a career with a high degree of strategy so that you can navigate a career with authority. It also gives you a clear roadmap on how and when to quit jobs, how to get promoted in the workplace, and basically how to operate with a high degree of conviction and authority to be in control in your career. And of course, the resume writing component through Resume Rocketfuel, which teaches you how to write a resume that recruiters are more likely to notice. And then, of course, the Ultimate Job Seeker Bootcamp, which teaches you how to approach job search, job interviewing with a high degree of strategy, and then making sure that you don't leave any money on the table. And if you feel like you're particularly struggling and you need a little bit more guidance on how to navigate the next steps of your career, I do offer some limited private one-on-one coaching, and you can reach me through my website for that as well. Anyway, hopefully you're lucky enough to have never experienced any things that I've talked about in this video, but even if you are, it's still worth making sure that you have a strategy and contingency plans in place, because you can't get too complacent, especially in today's job market. Anyway, appreciate you watching. We'll see you on the next one.